we're going to take a look at Le Havre. It's an incredibly popular Euro, and between it and Agricola, I was interested in getting at least one of them. I ended up splurging on a used copy of this. Paid more than I should have, but the going price for these guys doesn't seem to decrease much. So, both by the same designer. And anyway, I've only played it once, only part way through a game with my wife. I'm ready to start an exploration of it on video because I think there's some interesting things to say about it. Given the number of people who've covered this with reviews and with Rado doing a playthrough, you may say, well, what the hell are you doing it? Well, I do everything that, you know, I'm playing. I play things on video for various reasons, and not all of them have anything to do with the people who watch. But some of it is, I think that some of the insight that I might bring in and some of the exploration I bring in may be a little different from what other people do. But I'm not coming into this with any real experience of the game. I mean, I've played around with it a little bit with my wife. And I'm going to take a slightly different tack than I usually do with my introductions. I'm not sure how much I'm going to go into the rules, but you can see the game's not set up yet, right? I mean, usually my intro is just a setup for the start. So one of the things that's kind of weird about this game is that there's a lot of mechanism built into the components to handle differing number of players. There's a lot of tinkering with the system. Nothing you have to worry about too much with rules, but it makes it difficult to learn any game. So for example, this tells you how many players this card will go in the deck for. So this card will always be in the deck, but this one will only be in the deck in more than two players. And then this little shaded thing here says, hey, if you're playing the short game, you include it. So if it doesn't have the little check there, it's not included in the short game. So this one is only in 3 players or more in the full game, and only in 5 players for the short game. Likewise with these things, these are gonna, on the back side there's gonna be ships, but the front side is really, this is how the turn is driven and sort of the events of the proceeding of time, which is going to be these cards which tell you a number of different things. Let's see if I can read it out. So the first is the number of players that slot applies to. And you'll see, that makes sense. We go from 1 through 5. But it's not well explained in the rules. The next number is what order the cards are in. So this, in a 2-player game, is going to be the 6th card in the deck, but it's going to be the 8th card in the deck in any other number of players. You play with less of these cards in the short game, but you just trim off the bottom of the deck so that we don't have to worry too much about that. So over here is going to indicate how much food you need, and that again is balanced by the number of players. I haven't explained anything about the flow of the game. So basically what's going to happen is each player has one of these little boats, and they all start over here. And the first player sails out into this space, and he interacts with a chit that's going to be there, and we'll get into that maybe later. Then the next player goes here, and then the next player, and if you're only in a 2-player game, you'll only have these 2, goes here, and so on until you get to a point where somebody's reached here, and you handle their turn there, and then you interact with this card here, the round card. So with a lot of players, what you're going to see, well, I'm probably going to explore it with, I am going to explore it, I think, with 5 players. Everybody says don't play with more than 3. It's best in 2 or 3. And I agree it's an interesting game in that status. But I don't particularly trust the opinions of people and the why they don't like the larger number. For example, Tom Vassell gives his reason for why he doesn't like it, which is that if you have 5 different boats out here, right? Well, only one, if I had all the boats out and they would stretch from here to here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, well, whoever's here is going to move here, and then the next boat's going to move here. So like 2 people get 2 rounds, two actions in a given round, and the rest only get one, and that makes it very difficult. But what doesn't make it so terribly difficult is that the food requirements get lower in the number of players. The game, though, in terms of the total number of actions you get, etc., is going to be shorter. However, I do think that there's going to be this interesting competition mechanism in there, that it's going to be kind of a harsher game, and I really want to see that dynamic in play. I've seen how it works in 2. I'm fine with that. And I do want to explore those, because I doubt that I'll ever get anybody to play it in 5 unless I can make a good argument for that. Okay. And like I said, this is more disorganized than even my usual introductions to things. So what do you have in the game? You have a bunch of stuff. You basically have these different commodities, and in a sense, money is a commodity. Your goal of the game is to collect the most money, and each of these buildings and boats and stuff has a value on it. And that's what you're going to be scoring at the end of the game. These are going to be set up randomly in these different discs, and you don't get to see them at the beginning of the game, but once somebody interacts with them, the first thing they do is flip it over, and then it'll stay up for the rest of the game. So you have sort of this, and a lot of the game has this, slightly changing patterns. You're going to be seeing always the same chits come up. There's no difference, you know, from game to game what different things are going to arrive, but their ordering is going to be slightly different, and that's going to force you to make different evaluations of the board state throughout the entire game. And you're going to have that same kind of dynamic with well, the special buildings. There's a whole bunch of these, and I got a deck here that seems to be filled with a bunch of them too. That this was the expansion. I thought I was getting something a little more for the expansion. It comes free with the original, this version, I guess. It says with the expansion here. Okay. But I thought I was getting like another $10 game or something built in with it, which brought me above the 25 or so that I'm usually willing to bid on a euro, a good euro. But that means, of course, that I never get the really top selling ones. And I've only been disappointed really once with a top selling euro, with a sort of top rated euro, and that's Dominant Species. I think that's the only one that really, really gets a lot of buzz. And the main reasons for that is, okay, one, it doesn't represent the situation appropriately, and I'd say this one doesn't either, but on top of that, it's really annoying to play. You know, I'm not willing to put that much effort into something like that. Too much counting and stuff. This one seems pretty clean to play. Okay, let's keep maybe trying to follow some kind of plan here. So what happens when you move on these is basically they trigger the placement of some commodity into an offer. And we'll talk about what that means when we talk about what you can do. And this commodity would be money, although it's not really a commodity, over into here. And that's all great and good. And each one kind of does this. There's one special one that does interest, which is if you have any loans, you have to pay $1. Doesn't matter how many loans you have. If you have any, you have to pay $1 whenever somebody lands on that. Everybody has to pay that $1. Okay. So yeah, we were talking about the variability. You have this pile of special buildings. Now that's really random. You're going to have 6, I think, new buildings that are built, that are thrown into the game, and really could kind of shake up some of the game. But then you have the main deck of standard buildings here. And then the starting buildings, these are going to be held by the town. Anybody can use them. Nobody owns them. It is possible to buy them if you wish. These standard buildings are going to be arranged in 3 piles, here, here, and here, and then ordered by this number here, which means that you're always going to see the same buildings more or less in the same order, but player actions and the distribution of the initial deal can kind of affect that, kind of in the same way as these. You're always going to see the same pieces, but their ordering may change the dynamics of how the game plays out. And how does the game play out? It's pretty damn simple, actually. Unfortunately, the rules don't make it clear how simple it is, starting off with this huge, busy picture of all kinds of different stuff, which, yes, you have to express what's where, and if somebody was explaining it to you, that would be what they first did, but I would much rather have a textual representation. Enough of that. Components, oh, geez. So, the components have some issues for me. First of all, tiny, tiny print on here for, it's hard to see when I zoom in like this, but this is for food, and this is for the money value of that commodity for shipping. Okay. The food is kind of important and is largely visible. The money component, there are other places you can find them. But I'm looking for, okay. So these little red bricks here, we played, and this was, I think, our biggest mistake, maybe our only mistake. These bricks are different from these lumps of clay, that's clear, but when they're all set out on the board, it is not so obvious, especially since none of the other building materials seem to require a different kind of material. We may see the same thing between iron and steel, where the color and the iconography, you become so reliant on the color that you ignore the shape, basically, and they're not all that different. That was, I would say that's kind of a bit of an error in design. I'll be looking more carefully, but some kind of indication better than just the color and the shape in there, and in such a small, tiny icon would be very, very helpful. I don't know what it would have to be. Maybe a little border around it or something. Hard to tell. Okay. So where are we? I don't know. We have a bunch of different commodities that are here, and they're going to have their base side, and then they have an enhanced side, which may or may not actually be an enhancement. So for example, turning wood into charcoal means it's no longer wood, so you're not going to be able to build things out of it anymore, but it does provide more energy than burning wood. So the enhanced side is not necessarily something you automatically want. Same with cows. If you turn them into meat, they're cheaper to ship, or they give you less money to ship, but they're better. They're actually, you can eat them once they're dead, and also they don't reproduce anymore. So it's kind of, they go through a transformation. You wouldn't expect meat to reproduce. That brings me to another thing, which is the discussion of how thematic this is. Well, when anybody says thematic, I know that I should just ignore it because it means nothing. But again, some reviewers are saying, oh, it's so thematic because everything's linked, you know? The cows turn into meat when you process them. The different buildings seem to reflect what they are. Yeah, but the actions that I'm taking as a player are not at all reflective to any kind of model that I would have about what working in a harbor, in this kind of owning a business in a harbor, would be like. And as we see the mechanisms in the game, we'll see they're completely disconnected. So this becomes not a game about anything, but a game which happens to have an overlay. You know, you could change this to another subject, and it really wouldn't degrade the game at all, except in terms of the mnemonic ability to, you know, pay attention to, yeah, I use wood because you can burn it and it's energy and I can build things out of it. That all makes sense, but the actual actions you're taking as a player won't. So for example, time passing with certain flows, you can kind of do some hand waving and say that's the case there. Okay, so when I land on one of these, this, for example, and there's going to be one in each, this one would say take a grain and a fish and put them into these offers. And some pieces start in the game. So, for example, at the beginning of the game, there's going to be a clay, there's going to be 2 wood available, and there's going to be 2 fish available. Okay, so that's sort of the time aspect of the game, right? Each player takes their piece and they move it to the next empty circle on the board. and then they interact with that circle. So this guy would come down here, and he would put a wood and a clay into the two offerings. Then the player's allowed to do one of two things. This is his main action for the turn. Actually, he must do one of two things. One of those things is he can look at one of these piles, including the gold here, and say, yo, there's a big pile of that stuff there. I'll take it all. Now, I don't know what the hell that represents, but again, that's standard kind of Euro-type mechanisms here, and it does make for interesting gameplay. So, for example, after moving here, if I took a clay and a wood here, well, maybe there's enough wood that I want to scoop that up, and I just put that in my pile of my belongings. And there's no limit to what I can hold in my belongings, but, you know, there's an opportunity cost to whatever I do. The other thing that you can do as a player is you can pick up your disc, and usually it'll be sitting on some building or something, and well, you put it on a different building, and it's got to be a building that doesn't currently have a disc on it. So if somebody else is in that building, you can't go there and get anything done. As long as they sit there, they're using that building up, even if it's not producing or doing anything during that time. And that's a certain kind of blocking aspect, but again, completely like non-representative of anything in particular. So each building basically has something that it does when you land there. And let me explain what let me explain some of the issues on the building. But first, up here is the cost for building the building. Down here is the value of the building, which may be the cost for buying the building. Some buildings have a higher cost marked down here than their value. Over here is the cost for entering the building if you want to put your disc there. Down here is the type of building that'll be used in certain effects of buildings. And then here is the action that the building allows if you enter it. Now this one's action says, I can take as many iron as I like, and I spend 5 energy for each iron. Yeah, 5 energy is a lot. Wood only produces 1. The charcoal only produces 3. Coal over here only produces 3, and coke produces only 10. So that's a lot of energy that you're going to be throwing into this. But for each one that I do that to, I turn it into a steel piece. Why would I want to do that? Well, maybe I want steel, you know. Anyway, I do that by placing it here. If I own the building, I don't have to pay this entry cost. But if anyone else, including the town, does, I have to pay the entry cost. Some buildings don't have an entry cost. Hey, I can just land here. Some also have little icons like this, which will affect other buildings and such not. So, for example, this little thing, well, that's like laborers or something. Certain buildings, when you enter them, give you a bonus for each laborer you have, or each fisherman you generate. Now, the abilities of these guys, and this is why they're vital to be out here, is to build buildings. So if I land here, I'm allowed to build essentially there's going to be, not in this kind of order, but there's going to be piles of buildings up here. And I can choose the top, any of the top ones. And if I pay the cost in materials to build it after having gone here, I get to build that building. Now, this one's the same, except it costs me a food to use it. And this one costs me 2 foods, but it allows me to build up to 2 buildings from here, from the building proposals. So that's pretty cool. I can upgrade, I can increase my buildings more quickly. There's a harbor as one of the buildings, which is going to allow you to build these ships, which we'll get to in a little bit. They're kind of like buildings, but only you can use them. And there are a number of them that are that way. They're going to all show you a little lock here to say nobody else can visit. Okay. So that's your main action. It's either grab stuff or use your disc, moving it from one building to the other. And at the beginning of the game, you're not in any building. Then you're allowed, well, not then, also during your turn, you're allowed a bunch of free opportunities. Well, really only one is added here, which is buying buildings. You can buy any buildings you like by paying cash money for them. And they have to be either on top of here or in the town itself. You can't buy something someone else owns. The ones in the town, it's either one, you pay the cost in the value unless it has a little space under it that gives you a different cost. So for example, ships have a low value but a high cost. This has what, a 20-buck cost but only a 4-buck value, which means if you just bought this outright, you would be making a really bum deal. However, you can build it if you have the wharf. That's the only thing that allows you to build ships, I think. You need some steel and some energy. There's further special rules for the wharf where it has to be upgraded if it's going to build anything but wooden ships, which costs you extra coke, I think. Okay, there's a couple other things that you can do here. You can sell buildings at any time in the game, except I think you can't like jump in the middle of somebody else's single action or something. But essentially you can do it during their part of the turn if you need to raise money for some unknown reason. You can certainly do it when you hit the interest space or when you have to pay for food or whatever. And when you sell a building, you just get half its value and it goes into the town section. Everybody's still able to use it. It's been built. It's there. It's just no longer. And yeah, and here's the thing. You can't build anything that's in the town section. You can only buy it. That tends to be a bad deal, buying buildings from there. Just because with this, you're paying resources to get lots of victory points. With this, you're paying money, which is not only victory points, but it's victory points, it's money as well that I can churn around a few times in order to get that building. Now, the only reason you do this is kind of, well, there's a few reasons. One is maybe it's a locked building and nobody can visit it. I don't know if there's any of those. But another would be to gather these little markers, because if you own these, that's when they take effect. And then much more minor is probably the ability to collect the income from that card. But if it's a card that people really want to visit a lot, maybe collecting that income is worthwhile. Because whatever the entrance fee is, they pay you if you own the building. Okay, and then what do we got else? Final is you can repay loans pretty much at any time. Repaying a loan, when you take out a loan, you get one of these cards and you get 4 francs. And remember, you pay interest once per round, and it's just $1. It's not 1 per loan. At any time you can pay this back for 5 francs. At the end of the game though, you'll lose 7 francs for it. So if somehow you end up not being able to raise the cash to pay off all your loans, you get further penalized for that. Which may not be an issue with one loan, but it may be a big deal if you've got a big collection of loans. And yeah, in a sense, once you take one loan, you might as well take bunches of them, right? Because you're still paying the same interest and you might as well be borrowing more money. Okay, anything I missed here that I really wanted to babble about? I don't know. There's there's a lot of stuff here. So for example, this gives a listing of all the 2-player harvest cards in the short game, and then this gives, I think, the full game one. Yeah, of what all these different cards are going to look like, so you don't have to paw through the deck or anything. You have this reference, and there's one for every option of different players, from 2 to 5 players, long and short game. Each has its own little dynamic, and to some extent, you're assuming when they've done that much work that they've really finely tuned and balanced those. I have no idea whether they did or not, obviously. Let's see. We haven't talked too much about ships. So ships do a couple of neat things for you. For one thing, a ship will set... when you get here on the round card, you're going to have to eat a certain amount of food. And food is fish, meat, and that's about it. And you can turn in the counters for it. And you never get change when you turn in counters in that way. Which is to say, if you have smoked fish, which are worth 2, you may well not be able to meet an odd number of food requirement that you have. Alternatively, you can always spend money as if it's food. And that works for the harvest, and it also works if you need to spend food to get into one of these places. You can't spend food as if it's money. However, what the boats do is when you hit the harvest space, if you have a boat, based on the number of players, they produce an amount of food set by the game. So in the 5-player game, this boat is only going to bring 2 food. But in the 1-player game, yeah, I don't know. I don't know about the 1-player game. There are rules for it. I haven't looked to see what the hell's up with that. I'm not sure what you're trying to do in that case. I think it's just to run the mechanisms, because I didn't remember any victory conditions for a solo game. But maybe it's some sort of option. Okay. Oh, something else happens before the harvest. So if you have any grain, you get a bonus grain. And if you have at least 2 cows, you get a bonus cow. So there's a reason to keep a herd of cows, or to keep some grain for later, just because it will keep producing. And that can kind of factor into your decisions on what to do. Okay. So that was kind of a chaotic introduction, and obviously it isn't meant to teach you the game. It was more meant to kind of give me a chance to kind of talk about the game and remember it a little bit on my own before I set it up. I'm going to be doing a 5-player game of it, and no, for those who aren't familiar with me but are familiar with much more popular type of presentations, this isn't going to be like Grotto. I'm not going to be working really hard to explain the rules of the game. I may be going into strategy a decent amount, but again, I'm exploring the game, so don't expect an expert here. More importantly, I'm just going to be letting my mind kind of flow to understand, you know, to try to come up with funks, as it were, about you know, what my impressions are as it's going, etc. The whole thing's not very polished. It never is. I've been doing this for a long time. There are a few people who like to watch it, and that's cool, really cool. Of course, less on the Euro side than on other sides of games, but I do like to approach Euros in the same way, because I think analyzing the Euros under the same lens actually shows some interesting differences. Anyway, I'll set this sucker up for the 5-player game, and we'll get rocking on it.